Well, it's still morning. Good morning. I'm Jacob Olupona. I teach here in the Divinity School. I'm also in the Department of African and African American Studies. So it's quite an honor to be here and to introduce colleagues from different parts of the world who have come to be part of this conversation. The last and I think the final section is on the new intellectual connection. And we're going to listen to 4 distinguished scholars. I'm going to take some time or a few minutes to simply say 1 or 2 things about them. Professor Rabat Pass is the, well, I think he's a professor. He's the founding director of the Center at Maghreb in Algeria. He received his PhD in political science in 2021, and he has published extensively in different parts of, different aspects of Islam in Algeria and Tunisia. So he's going to be one of these, I think, one of the speakers. I should also say that he is the editor of the Global and Local in Algeria and Morocco, the world, State and the Village, which was published by Routledge in 2015. Dr. Ebrima Sall is not here, but I think it will be the last speaker. We'll use Skype to connect with him. He's the executive director of Trust Africa, a Pan-African foundation based in Dakar, Senegal. He used to be the director of CODESRIA. He did that for several years. And I think that was one of the times when I met him in Senegal. He will join us later, and I think he will be the last speaker. Madam Fatima Harrak is a historian and political scientist. She holds a degree, a PhD from the University of London, SOAS. She's a research professor of the University of Mohammed V Institute of African Studies in Morocco. She is an active member of the Pan-African Council for the Development of Social Sciences Research in Africa, which is CODESRIA. Dr. Mansour Kedidir is a professor at the High School of Economics and a research affiliate at the Center for Research in Social and Cultural Anthropology in Oran, Algeria. He also received his PhD in political science from the University of Lyon. He's the author of several books. Several of these books, of course, are known to all of us. They deal with issues relating to the growth of Islam in the Sahel and in North Africa. So let me again welcome our speakers. Each of you will have about 20 minutes to speak, and then we should be able to have about 10, 20 minutes at the end of it to raise questions and to discuss your papers. The normal practice is that when it's just about 5 minutes to end of the paper, I'll show my paper there. And so I'm going to appeal to you to please stick to this time so that we can have enough time at the end of it to discuss your presentations. Thank you and welcome again.
Donc, I present my excuse. My English is basic. I prefer speaking French. Je tiens à présenter mes sincères et vifs remerciements au professeur Ousmane Khan de nous avoir invités et au staff de la Divinity School d'avoir organisé ce colloque et facilité notre voyage. J'ai, durant hier et aujourd'hui, on a reçu aujourd'hui une char de cavalerie ce matin. Ça ressemble à la cavalerie. Donc je parlerai lentement. Et je verrai respecter le temps. Hier et aujourd'hui, nous avons écouté attentivement des interventions qui portaient sur des points précis, les confréries, les djihadistes. Et c'est très riche. Et je tiens aujourd'hui, mon intérêt dans mon intervention est d'encadrer ce savoir et d'expliquer, de chercher ces perspectives de savoir l'érudition islamique et de chercher d'expliquer un peu leurs perspectives historiques. I find and analyze the link of Islamic and secular knowledge and explain the historical perspective. Donc, évidemment, mon intervention s'inscrit dans ce que je peux appeler la remise en cause de l'épistémologie occidentale. Et bien, cette approche a été premièrement initiée par Edouard Saïd, puis approfondie par Midembe, Apia et le professeur aussi Ousmane Khan, ce que j'ai trouvé dans ses écrits. Donc, cette épistémologie occidentale a toujours nié le savoir africain, l'érudition islamique entre autres, et essaie de séparer le Maghreb de l'Afrique occidentale. Donc, mon intervention s'inscrit dans ce cas pour remettre en cause cette épistémologie et dire qu'il y avait un savoir africain, il y avait une érudition islamique, il y avait toujours des connexions entre l'Afrique du Sahel et le Maghreb. C'est le but de mon intervention. Donc, ces connexions, en fait, elles apparaissent qu'elles n'existaient pas, mais toute connexion se construit et se déconstruit en fonction des contextes, et plus précisément s'agissant des deux régions qui sont caractérisées par une sismicité structurelle, ce que j'appelle une sismicité structurelle, des conflits, crises, etc. Et l'intellectuel agit et interagit avec ce contexte et avec son environnement. Donc, en analysant les connexions intellectuelles, j'ai pu dégager deux catégories d'intellectuels. Les laïcisants, et les islamisants. Donc, en analysant, le professeur Ousmane Khan distingue entre europhone et non europhone. Il y a d'autres écrivains, comme je citais, comme Abdallah al-Aroui, qui distinguent trois catégories. Mais toutefois, entre les deux catégories, la frontière n'est pas étanche, elle est perméable. Vous trouvez généralement un marxisme qui devient islamiste et vice-versa. Donc, c'est quelque chose de mouvant. Donc, en analysant le parcours historique des deux intellectuels islamisants et laïcs, qui vont d'ailleurs charpenter mon intervention en deux parties, j'ai constaté que chez l'intellectuel islamisant, c'est mal traduit, c'est sécularisé, c'est l'Afrique anglophone qui est sécularisée. L'Afrique francophone, c'est laïcisé parce que ça provient du discours des acteurs politiques, c'est dans la Constitution et généralement dans les revendications quotidiennes qu'on voit dans les discours de plusieurs acteurs. Donc, j'ai constaté que chez l'intellectuel laïcisant, durant tout ça, dans sa trajectoire, il est parti de l'engagement qui a unifié ses rangs vers la dispersion dans la période postcoloniale. Contrairement aux intellectuels laïcisants, l'intellectuel islamisant est parti de la marge, il a été ostracisé vers la tentation hégémonique où il veut dominer l'espace. J'essaierai devant vous d'expliquer ces deux parcours, leur trajectoire et leur représentation. Donc, dans le premier axe, qui est l'intellectuel laïcisant de l'engagement et la dispersion, il y a deux actes. Il y a, premièrement, son parcours mouvementé. Et à la fin du parcours mouvementé, il a abouti à ce que j'appelle une vision éclatée, l'émiettement de la pensée de l'intellectuel laïcisant. Dans le parcours mouvementé, premièrement, c'est le panafricanisme qui a permis d'unifier l'intellectuel maghrébin et subsaharien et de l'Afrique sud. Ça a commencé bien les débuts avec le congrès de Chicago, c'était les premières idées, donc vous avez le congrès qui a pu dégager les premières, c'était des sens culturalistes. Il y avait Blyden, il y avait Marcus Garvey, et puis entre les deux guerres, le mouvement commençait à se radicaliser. De long, mais surtout à Paris, où le Parti communiste français a créé l'intercolonial, où se trouvaient les anciens immigrés, les syndicalistes maghrébins et subsahariens et les étudiants. Et ils ont inscrit dans l'ordre du jour l'émancipation des peuples. 2 ans après, à Bruxelles, sous impulsion du Comintern, donc ça a marqué un temps de la radicalisation où s'est inscrit l'émancipation des peuples et les luttes de libération. Ces 3 pas ont abouti au congrès de Manchester, évidemment Manchester, où on trouve Nkrumah et d'autres jeunes leaders qui vont un peu qui vont encadrer et prendre en charge ces revendications et les transporter en Afrique. En Afrique, c'est l'ère de Nkrumah, bien sûr. Les premiers États indépendants n'ont cessé d'aider les autres des mouvements de libération. 3, on constate des rencontres. Alors, cette connexion, elle a été soudée et consolidée par des rencontres et les supports médiatiques. Il y a 3 rencontres. La rencontre première de Koumazi, et celle d'Accra. Mais ces 2 rencontres, puis de Brazzaville, de Casablanca. Mais ces rencontres-là ont permis, en reléguant au second plan, le clivage culturel. On va constater que ces clivages vont ressurgir dans la période postcoloniale et qui va diviser un peu le panafricanisme et concourir à son échec. Donc, ça, ces rencontres, à part ces rencontres de Koumazi et d'Accra, où était inscrite la lutte de libération, des mouvements d'encouragement de libération, et l'Afrique revient aux Africains. Donc, les Africains, c'était les élites laïcisées, qui ont été formées dans l'école occidentale. Dans le support médiatique, il y en a beaucoup, mais je cite 2. Présence africaine, qui est très ancienne, qui était à l'origine de 2 forums, celui de Paris et de Rome. Et pour l'anecdote, durant de Rome, les Français à l'époque ont mis l'embargo pour éviter que la délégation algérienne y participe. Il y a toute une littérature abondante. Et le deuxième journal, c'était le Moujahid. Le Moujahid, c'était le journal du FLN, donc en 1956. Il a été diffusé. Il y avait l'ambassadeur France Fanon, qui était à Accra. Il jouait un rôle important dans les écrits, dans les diffusions de savoir, et un peu parler et aborder tout ce qui se passe en Afrique dans une trajectoire révolutionnaire. Voilà. Après ces supports, donc, vint la période postcoloniale. Donc, les premières élites qui étaient unies dans l'idée panafricaniste se trouvaient au pouvoir. Donc, évidemment, ils ont été aidés par la bipolarité, le mouvement non aligné et le tiers-mondisme triomphant. Donc, simplement, toutefois, ces élites-là ont marginalisé les autres. On marginalisé plutôt l'islamiste, et qui va prendre un jour sa revanche. Donc, cette période-là ne va pas durer longtemps. Le désenchantement de l'intellectualisation a commencé à la fin des années 70 avec les crises des États, les crises économiques, la crise pétrolière, etc. Donc, le durcissement des régimes répressifs, la montée des extrémismes, l'instabilité politique et la focalisation de l'intelligentsia du Maghreb sur le Moyen-Orient et le conflit israélo-palestinien. Donc, vous avez cette intelligentsia qui était soudée avec les Africains et commence à s'intéresser au Moyen-Orient. Ce bilan-là a été fait, donc on peut parler de certaines ruptures, puisque l'arabisme montant a cassé cette connexion qui était à la base, donc l'arabisation. Les Algériens, Maghrébins, Tunisiens, Libyens s'intéressaient plus à ce qui se passe au Moyen-Orient, en Afrique. Passé ces crises le Maghreb, on commence à s'intéresser à l'Afrique subsaharienne, ce que je peux appeler, moi, le renouveau. Alors, le renouveau, il est il y a des connexions balbutiantes. On la voit dans premièrement, l'octroi des bourses. L'Algérie a octroyé, à titre d'exemple, en 1990, 748, qui est minime, mais aujourd'hui, elle est arrivée à 10 000. Elle est dépassée par le Maroc, qui octroie à peu près 14 000 à 16 000 bourses. Donc, sur le plan institutionnel, nous avons deux organismes, le CRASC, dont je fais partie, et le CEMA. Je laisse le soin à mon ami Bob, donc mon concitoyen d'ami, qui va parler de CEMA. Donc, au sujet du CRASC, cette institution est conventionnée avec le CODESRIA, et existe l'ARB, l'African Review Book, dont je coordonne l'édition. Elle édite, elle publie toutes les recensions, c'est-à-dire les comptes rendus concernant les livres, et qui parlent un peu de tous les domaines africains. Autre institution, les Algériens ont prévu l'esprit PANAF. L'esprit PANAF, c'est un pavillon réservé aux Africains. Chaque salon du livre d'Alger, qui compte d'octobre au début de novembre, et il ouvre la voie à tous les Africains écrivains et scientifiques de venir exposer le livre et donner des conférences. Et puis, il y a une édition, qui ici, l'édition Tombouctou, qui aide l'édition africaine. Voilà ce qui est le renouveau. On compte donc d'autres. Évidemment, il y a d'autres domaines sécuritaires où les États ensemble collaborent. Mais on ne peut pas parler ainsi, on ne peut pas dire que c'est une condition intellectuelle, elle est institutionnelle. Donc, cette trajectoire qui a commencé de l'engagement jusqu'à la dispersion, elle provient d'une vision éclatée, ou ce que j'appelle l'échec de l'intellectuel laïcisant. Alors pourquoi on parle maintenant de l'échec et la vision éclatée? Je vais aborder 3 points. Premièrement, il y a des approches distanciées. À la base, durant la période coloniale, il y avait des approches. Je citerai 2, qui ont de grandes personnalités, mais ils avaient des divisions différentes. Cheikh Anta Diop et Léopold Senghor. Dans son ouvrage de personnalité hors pair, Fondement économique et culturel d'un État fédéral d'Afrique noire, Cheikh Anta Diop défend l'unité africaine et préconise l'établissement d'un État fédéral. Voilà. L'État fédéral, il prend l'unité culturelle de l'Afrique noire en excluant l'Afrique blanche. Voilà. Déjà, il sépare les deux Afriques, du Maghreb. Léopold Senghor parle autre chose. Il dit, je cite, « J'ai souvent défini l'africanité. J'ai souvent défini l'Afrique comme la symbiose complémentaire des valeurs de l'arbitre et de la négritude. Je vous dis dans une première phase, essayer de démontrer que cette symbiose par métissage s'est d'abord réalisée au niveau des races et des ethnies. Voilà les biais, les travers. Donc c'est un travail pan-africain de l'unité. Revendication de la négritude a conduit à une impasse. Elle fut critiquée comme un instrument idéologique pour déposséder les Africains de leur culture et préparer le terrain à une occidentalisation de la société. À les approches différenciées, nous avons le deuxième point, le positionnement idéologique, qui a un peu divisé les laïcisants. Marxistes et nationalistes, ils étaient contre les islamistes. Au Maghreb, on disait les arabisants, les islamistes, les sociodémocrates et les socialistes. Mais de toutes ces catégories, voilà, mais de toutes ces catégories, c'est l'acteur marxisant qui a dominé l'espace, le discours est présent dans la scène politique. Conséquence, le compartimentage des élites, l'islamisant et marxisant, éloignement de l'intellectuel maghrébin du champ africain, donc c'est l'Arabie, il s'est focalisé sur le monde arabe, et montée du nationalisme, d'où l'aveuglement de l'intelligentsia. Généralement, le nationalisme, les nationalistes, c'est eux, comme disait Bénédicte Ederson, c'est eux qui créent la nation et conduit irréversiblement à l'aveuglement. Dans ce cadre, France Fanon note la conscience nationale, au lieu d'être la cristallisation coordonnée des aspirations les plus intimes de l'ensemble du peuple, au lieu d'être le produit immédiat le plus palpable de la mobilisation populaire, ne sera en tout état de cause qu'une forme sans contenu fragile, grossière. Les failles que l'on y découvre expliquent amplement la facilité avec laquelle dans les jeunes pays indépendants, on passe de la nation à l'ethnie, de l'État à la tribu. Là, c'est Frantz Fanon. Ainsi, en s'engageant consciemment ou naïvement dans la négrification et l'arabisation, l'intellectuel laïcisant sombre dans l'évanescence et au retour désespérant du chauvinisme. Le troisième point, ce que j'appelle la conscience malheureuse et émiettement de la pensée. 1980, c'est le début de la phase de désenchantement, échec du projet national, de l'État postcolonial. Cette phase fut suivie par le durcissement des régimes, l'emprisonnement des intellectuels, l'exil forcé et le silence mortifère. Crise économique et sociale, crise de légitimité, instabilité politique, etc. Donc il revient à Hegel d'avoir défini, forgé le concept de conscience, une happy conscience, la conscience malheureuse. Donc, il l'a défini comme le déchirement entre la raison et l'intuition de l'individu, et son être, et son environnement. Donc, nous avons deux grands auteurs qui représentent ce déchirement, cette conscience malheureuse. Je citerai par exemple une belle phrase de Mamadou Diouf. Il dit que c'est une victime, l'intellectuel laïciste est une victime expiatoire, consensuelle et rebelle. Cette définition diachronique, révélatrice du déchirement, est affirmée par la dichotomie empruntée à Gramsci qu'il opère entre intellectuel traditionnel et intellectuel moderne. Mais je pense que Achille Mbembe, c'est le seul qui exprime ce déchirement de l'être. Il dit, se référant à l'expression de Michel Certeau, le philosophe français, le malheur généalogique. Il dit, celui-là qui nous fait naître et grandir quelque part et nous inscrit, que nous le voulions ou non, dans une lignée qui nous est possible ni de choisir, ni vraiment de légitimer, ni de séparer. À rejoindre chez nous parfois le fatalisme, disait Maktoum. Voilà. Cette problématique de la conscience malheureuse nous renvoie à la lutte pour la reconnaissance. Ce concept était développé par Axel Honneth dans La reconnaissance et le mépris. Et c'est un problème qu'il faut actualiser. Tout le travail d'Axel Honneth qui nous offre des clés pour comprendre certaines réalités notamment dans les pays du Sud. Je viens au deuxième axe, l'intégré-islamisation de la marginalisation, ce que j'intitule de la marginalisation à la tentation hégémonique. Eh bien, l'intégré-islamisation a profité de ce que j'appelle le temps long et la sédimentation de l'islamisation de l'Afrique subsaharienne. Le temps long, il nous renvoie à Brodel. Donc, effectivement, cette période de l'érudition islamique qui s'est propagée en islam a profité parce que les Occidentaux étaient accaparés, happés par la découverte de l'Amérique. Ils ont laissé ça tranquille. Donc, ce qui fait qu'on explique un peu comment l'islamisation de l'Afrique s'est faite calme, lentement et sans heurts, et d'une manière pacifique. Donc, des origines à la colonisation, donc on cite le début, Billet soudain, ce qu'on appelle. Il y avait les Berbères, Massouda, Goudala et Lemtouna, et puis il y avait les Almoravides qui sont venus, et ils ont laissé leur empreinte d'un islam rigoriste, et puis après, il y avait les Saadiens. Les Saadiens, c'est autre chose. Ils étaient intéressés plutôt par l'or de l'empire de Senegal. Mais c'est les Almohades qui ont travaillé l'islamisation. 20 ans précisément, les oulémas, comme je citais Abdelkrim el-Maghili, qui était conseiller de Asqiya de Senegal, il a été aussi à Kano, il a construit une mosquée, et dans les disciples qui se revendiquent des travaux de Maghili, c'est Danfodio. Donc, mais alors, l'intellectuel islamisant a été marginalisé par la période coloniale, il va prendre la revanche quelque part. Alors, dans ce cadre, marginal de l'acteur islamisant, effet de la culture occidentale sur les intellectuels islamisants qui étaient au pouvoir, il avait peut-être ignoré que la culture était un instrument redoutable de la domination culturelle. Je cite Khan Ousmane, citant Mudembe. Il affirme: même pendant la période postcoloniale, ni les africanistes, ni les Africains prônant l'authenticité de l'Afrique, encore moins les afrocentristes, n'ont su s'affranchir des représentations schématiques et simplificatrices à l'extrême de l'Afrique, telles que l'a inventé l'ordre épistémologique occidental. Voilà, donc, je vais vite. Donc, et puis, l'islamisation a profité d'un contexte géopolitique favorable à partir de l'année 60 de la crise de la guerre israélo-palestinienne, où l'Arabie saoudite a découvert l'islam comme un instrument géopolitique. Voilà, et tout. Donc il y avait à l'époque, il y avait un terreau qui était préparé, à l'époque, disséminé. Donc, cela me renvoie au deuxième point, ce que j'appelle la prédisposition religieuse de représentation du monde. Donc, au sujet de la représentation du monde de l'intellectualisation, il faut prêter ce concept à Bourdieu, l'habitus religieux. Donc, l'enracinement de l'islam en Afrique, représentation simple et unifiée du monde, les rudiments marchands, islamisation sans heurts pacifique, les Africains ont trouvé dans l'islam une source de leur libération et un moyen de recouvrement de leur dignité. Khutbat al-Wada' du prophète, bien s'applique bien. Rejet des valeurs occidentales, rôle de l'érudition al-Maghili, dont Fodio, Cheikh Ibrahim Niaz, tous ont travaillé donc cette érudition continue, paisible, etc. Donc maintenant, malheureusement, donc deux acteurs, on a deux acteurs dans l'espace, on a la conception du monde des djihadistes, je dirais un mot, donc la seule connexion parfaite, on a tous les djihadistes, dans tous les groupes, ACMI, Ansar, l'ACMI. Donc, que ce soit c'est l'ACMI ou Ansar des Moujaou, vous trouvez les Burkinabés, les Algériens, c'est une connexion parfaite parce qu'ils représentent, ils sont soudés par la même représentation du monde, ils partagent les mêmes vérités coraniques. Par rapport à cet acteur, il y a l'acteur des confréries, moins peut-être hégémonique dans certains pays, puisqu'ils sont contrôlés par l'État, etc. Et ils dominent, ces deux acteurs actuellement qui dominent l'espace public, soit au Maghreb, soit au Sahel. Donc, pour conclure, je vais lire ma conclusion. Excusez-moi, professeur, d'avoir grignoté un peu de temps. Alors, de l'étude des trajectoires et des représentations des intellectuels maghrébins et subsahariens, il ressort que les connexions ont toujours été caractérisées par des continuités et des discontinuités. S'il apparaît que leur développement et leurs perspectives ont été bloqués par l'État national, incapable de garantir la démocratisation de la vie publique, à moins qu'il les promeuve dans un dessein politique ou géopolitique, cela ne signifie nullement qu'il est le seul responsable de la situation de laïcisant ou islamisant soit-il. Supportant mal sa condition dans une société traversée par des conflictualités latentes et n'arrivant pas à rompre avec les relents de la doxa occidentale, l'intellectuel africain cherche sa voie de libération dans la modernité et la tradition. La sécularisation et la prégnance de la religion, le pouvoir et une société frappée de léthargie, le sacrifice et l'exil. Devant ces questionnements existentiels, le choix est difficile à prendre. Néanmoins, cela permet de tourmenter sa conscience jusqu'à l'amener à transcender le réel et dégager une pensée du Sud à même de répondre aux profondes pulsations de la société et aux soupirs des damnés de la terre. Si tout intellectuel devait réfléchir à libérer les Africains de leur tourment, le pari d'une pensée libre et originale peut être gagné. S'accrocher à une image d'épinal du progrès, telle que nous a été dessinée ailleurs, loin de nos sables brûlants, ou regarder toujours en arrière, vers un temps à jamais révolu, c'est ignorer les dynamiques historiques des sociétés africaines et baliser nos déserts qui nous ont longtemps habités. De ces déductions, la question de la connexion peut paraître subsidiaire si les intellectuels maghrébins subsahariens ne sont pas habités par la même angoisse existentielle et n'assumant pas une responsabilité historique. Au-delà de sa conscience et de sa mission consubstantielle à son essence de producteur de savoir et de sens, l'intellectuel africain, respirant le même air vicié, pataugeant dans la même réalité complexe et subissant le même temps un temps lourd, le temps des États fragiles, généalogiquement voué à l'autoritarisme et le temps des sociétés meurtries et interpellé pour porter à l'échelle universelle la condition de l'homme africain. Malraux disait dans un bon discours que l'Afrique est au cœur de l'histoire universelle par rapport à Sarko. Dans cette optique, la connexion peut nous paraître une conséquence. Dans une mondialisation qui s'apparente plus à une vague monothéiste, rapproche les populations sans distinction de nationalité, de race et de religion, et où les idées circulent à une vitesse lumière, ne faut-il pas penser à une connexion d'intellectuels facilitée par une communauté virtuelle, éloignée dans une première étape des lourdeurs bureaucratiques des pouvoirs nationaux et le contrôle du savoir avant que l'intellectuel africain n'arrache la place qui lui est siée dans la société. Je vous remercie.
First of all, let me, in my turn, thank Osman and Divinity School for their kind invitation and for the opportunity they have given me to attend this conference and meet a beautiful bouquet of young scholars, brilliant and eminent young scholars. I think it was refreshing, and you know, I gained some years by mingling with this, the younger generations of scholars who are working on this region from the prism that we have tried to defend at the Institute of African Studies, which is a prism that defies the area studies, the Western Area Studies division. So I'm really very happy to be here, and I've learned a lot. My presentation is very modest. It's on the research that on Moroccan-African relations that has been done at the Institute of African Studies, created in the 1980s. So I adapt myself completely to the chronology presented by my brother Mansour. But the Institute of African Studies was created in a very particular moment. It was created in the 1980s. We are on the morrow of the Iranian Revolution and at the eve of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So we are at a very important transition in our world, not unlike the transitions that we are living today. So the questions that were asked then, some of them are still being asked today. So let me say a platitude, which has been really confirmed during these 2 days, these very rich 2 days, about the relations between the Maghreb and West Africa and Western Bilad Sudan, which these relations which are characterized by they being based on a common religious, cultural, and intellectual legacy. Secondly, there being relations of reciprocity, relations of mutual exchange and interaction. There being secular, that is very old. I mean, they are there before Islam. Of course, Islam has done something, has brought something to the relations, but they are there forever. So they are historic, they are old, profound, but they are also very vibrant, they are changing. As for the Moroccan-African relations, I think we in Morocco, we like to think that we have very special relations with Western Africa. We are still ruled by a Sharifian dynasty. We are a nation state today, but we are still ruled by a Sharifian king, which is something that is very special. So let me just tell you about a little story which is remembered in Morocco very vividly. It's a very symbolic story. C'est la petite histoire. When King Mohammed V, one of the actors of the Casablanca group, was exiled to Madagascar in 1953 because he banded with the nationalist movement. He received very few visits in his exile. It was really limited. But among the many visits, among the visits that are most remembered in Morocco, is the visit that he received from Sheikh Ibrahim Niass. That's something very, very, very special. It's not only Sheikh Ibrahim Niass, the person, the wali, etc., but it's also the followers and the thousands and hundreds and tens of thousands of followers that he had throughout West Africa. So it's a symbolic kind of action. So the relations between Morocco and Western Africa is not only a relation of elites, a relation between the king and the sheikh, but it has a popular dimension. And because it has that popular dimension, it has never been weakened, neither by colonialism, nor by the establishment of border states, nor by the ideological drifts of the last 70 years, nor by the various plans to isolate Morocco from its African roots or its African depths, which started in the 16th century and which continue until today. So the successive kings of independent Morocco carried on with their endeavor to preserve and nurture these relations and to cultivate religious, cultural, and intellectual links through various means. The building of mosques, offering of scholarships for all African countries for training students and cadres in various scientific and technical disciplines, Hajj gifts, books for libraries, Qur'ans for mosques, whatever. But also the establishment of associations of ulama, associations of students, etc. And one of the traditions that has been started under Hassan II was the invitation to take part in the Ramadan lectures, which are presided over by the king and which are transmitted directly on national television. That's a very big event that's watched throughout Morocco. So the creation of the Institute of African Studies goes also within this framework. It's true that the creation of the Institute comes following Morocco's walking out very bruyamment from the OAU in 1984 over the question of Western Sahara, still with us today. But there is also another petite histoire for the creation of the Institute. It was in 1985, during one of these Ramadan lectures, the alim from Mali, Sheikh Ali Diallo, gave a lecture on the challenges facing the Muslim world and facing Islam in Africa in particular. And he concluded, remember the context, 85, we are in this very, very important context. And he concluded his lecture by calling on Morocco to revitalize ihya, he used the ihya, to revitalize its secular engagement vis-à-vis Africa. When Sheikh Diallo finished his lecture, and before the king concludes the session dedicated to this lecture, he responded immediately to Sheikh Diallo by looking at the government as saying, directing the government to create a chair for the study of the common Moroccan-African heritage at the University Mohammed V. This was in 1985. The institute will be created by royal decree in 1987. Following this, so this is the kind of a very subtle kind of relations that links Morocco and Moroccan kings, if you like, also to the leaders, to the elites, and to the people of Western Africa. This is, there ensured, of course, the creation of the institute, as I said. The institute was created, and within the institute, there was a chair dedicated to the study of the common Moroccan-African heritage. The second lecturer at this chair, within the chair, was John Hanwick, who spoke about the intellectual relations, and he's an expert in that by the recognition of everybody. So he summarized his findings about Moroccan-African relations, or Maghrebian-African relations. We can generalize that, actually. First of all, the evidence of human interaction association and intermingling between the populations of North and Sub-Saharan Africa preceded the arrival of Islam, but became more active and dynamic during the Islamic era. Secondly, that during the Islamic era, there were relations of reciprocal and mutually beneficial trade and functioned through well-trodden roads, punctuated with renowned cities around, and which became centers of learning and around which empires were developed and thrived. Third, with the exception of the Lamtuna conquest of Sijil Massa in the 11th century and the Saadi conquest of Songhai in the 16th century, diplomacy prevailed over war in these relations. Fourth, cultural borrowings, calligraphy, music, trance, decorative arts, etc., were adapted to local ethic and aesthetic, and I use the formula you used yesterday. Fifth, actors in these cultural and intellectual exchanges, which varied from merchants, jurists, judges, Sufis, and just ordinary people, came from the north as they come from the south. We have many renowned names. We have the Saheli, Tijani, Ahmed bin Dris from the north, if you like. We have Al-Balbali, Al-Kanimi, Ahmed Baba from the south, and the list is endless. So it's from the womb of these exchanges that the common religious and intellectual foundations of Islam in the Western Muslim world, this part of the Islamic world which englobed Al-Andalus, northern and Western Africa, it's from this womb that this intellectual tradition was born, namely, and we have talked about this morning, the Ash'ari dogma, the Maliki school of jurisprudence, and the Sunni mysticism of Al-Junayd. So these foundations these intellectual foundations of Islam in Africa and their significance today has to be underlined today. The Ash'ari dogma, as you know, implies separation between faith and action, meaning that a Muslim who testifies to the unicity of God and the prophecy of Muhammad may not be excommunicated. And that's a reply to takfir. The Maliki school of jurisprudence, which prevails in this area until today, is characterized, prevails, but it's not unique today. There have been the introduction of new schools and new doctrines. The Maliki school of jurisprudence, which prevailed in the past in this Western Islamic world, is characterized by three features, which are of very important political importance today. First, a methodology of extracting laws from foundation texts. And this answers a little bit the question of ijtihad. Second, the importance attached to public interest, maslaha al-amma, in the elaboration of the laws. And this is important for the legality, the legitimacy, and the applicability of the laws. Third, the respect of local traditions, customs, ما جرى به العمل. And this is a means of integrating local customary law and opposing its being taxed as bid'ahs. And this is what had led many Muslims from other parts of the Muslim world to look upon Islam in this part of the world as being syncretic or whatever. But we know our syncretism. So the third foundation of Islam in North Africa, and we have talked about it a lot during this conference, is the Sunni spiritual path of Al-Junayd, and which spread, in which the Maghreb actually played a very important role in its spread, starting with the Shadiliya in the 13th century and ending with the Tijaniya and the Idrisiya in the 18th and 19th century. A brand of Sufism that is distinguished by its moral character and by its extraordinary capacity for popular mobilizations. And we've seen some pictures which still stand in today in my head. So it is thinking about these foundations of secular, foundations of the intellectual tradition that link West Africa to the Maghreb, that Sheikh Diallo, I think, relied when he called for the revitalization of Moroccan engagement in Africa. The mobilization of this same trilogy today is still necessary in order to face up to the threat of takfiris and jihadis, and this is one of the missions that the Moroccan Ministry of Islamic and Waqf and Islamic Affairs is really looking after in cooperation with our brothers in Northern and Western Africa. So the Institute of, now I move, oh la la. I just started my lecture. Now I'll try to I'll try to make it as short as possible. The Institute, as I said, centered essentially on the study of the common Moroccan-African heritage, which is a big mission, which covers all sorts of headings. The Institute was not given a lot of means, meaning financial means, to really do its to realize its mission, but it endeavored to promote research in Africa in the humanities and social sciences, organized seminars and conferences to which participants came from Morocco, Africa, and the rest of the world. Establish relations of cooperations with national and international bodies pursuing the same objective. Management of a specialized library, the only African library, Africanist library, if you like, in Morocco, and big program of publications for which the Institute is very proud. The subject matter, we have talked about it. It was started modestly with scholars coming essentially from the humanities. It was directed mostly by historians until 2008, when a human geographer, finally was elected to direct the Institute. It has done during its first, let's say, 10 or 15 years, mostly historic research, but has also created multidisciplinary research units dealing with religious dynamics, dealing with development issues, dealing with geopolitics, three research units which are still functioning. And it was able to produce a large number of publications, around 200 or 250 titles until now, distributed on a range of series, conferences, symposia, research, texts and documents, dictionaries and encyclopedia, translations, literature, etc., and the review and a newsletter. The publications, if we try to, among the publications, I am sure that during the first half of the life of the Institute, up until 2008, publications of the Institute included essentially editions, translations of numerous Arabic manuscripts attesting to the human linguistic and cultural relations across the Sahara. We had pilgrimage journeys, many pilgrimage journeys published. Mauritanians were very present, heavily present in that. Ibn al-Qadi, al-Fouti, Fatawa, among which Fatwa Ahmad Baba, Fatwa of Ibn al-Qadi, biographies of major ulama of North and West Africa, which didn't appear in Ahmad Baba's Nail al-Ibtihaj, biographies of Sufi sheikhs such as Ahmed bin Dris, Ofai's enigmatic saint, Ahmad Baba and Timbuktu's major work, Tuhfat al-Fudala, in addition to about 50 conferences of the Moroccan-African Heritage Chair, given by eminent scholars, Africanist scholars from Africa and from around the world, and it's through them that the Institute really opened on the Africanist, international Africanist communities, topics varying from tasawwuf, literature, history, languages, music, calligraphy, decorative arts. So it really covers, there are small pamphlets, but by really eminent researchers, and they are very much sought after by researchers. So something happened starting 2008, which I consider as the second phase of the history of the Institute of Africans. I forgot to mention that relations between the Institute of African Studies and CODESRIA were also developed. And for the first time, there was this great opening on the community of scholars, African scholars, working also on the social history of Africa. So during the second period, which started approximately around 2008, two big developments had occurred, both at the level of at the national level, on the Moroccan level, and at the level of the IIS. First of all, at the national level, this period is characterized by a clear, what we can call a pivot towards Africa, taken by the present King Mohammed VI, and the inauguration of a vigorous economic and religious diplomacy in Africa. This strategic option of Morocco was conducive to the proliferation of institutes, centers, and think tanks, both public and private, Moroccan and non-Moroccan, dedicated to the study of all things African and geared towards producing policy recommendations, essentially both for the politicians and for the business community. There followed also the creation of African studies programs within the universities, the emergence, and that's something that's very new. The second development, which also découle, follows in this direction, was more geographical concentration of the research at the Institute on the Sahara and the Sahel, more implications of foreign scholars in the work of the Institute, more collaboration, and for the first time with the French having boycotted the Institute during its first years, up until the death of Jean de Vis, who never accepted to come and visit the Institute. Up until then, the French had really considered that it was an affront to create an Institute of African Studies when you could study African Studies at the, in Paris. So we had to wait for Jean de Vis to die. Exactly. To die, and with him the colonialist school, if you like, before the French could dare come and join and work with the Institute. In the meantime, we had found we had opened up on the Anglo-American school, African school, through the good offices of John Hanwick and others. But John Hanwick was the sheikh who really opened up and who introduced us into ASA, and through ASA we were very active in the development of Saharan Studies Association within the ASA. So we have been there when the ASA created the Saharan Studies Association. So instead of the French connection, we had the Anglo-American connection, and through the Anglo-American connections, we were able to open up on the international community of Africanists and be visible internationally. So the Institute, 1 minute. So because of this pivot towards Africa, the Institute recruited more scholars, new scholars into that were strengthening the social sciences component of the more economists, more international relations specialists, in particular more sociologists. Topics of research were changing. The common Moroccan-African heritage was there, but it was en sourdine, and the lectures of the common Moroccan-African heritage were, instead of having 2 conferences per year, we would have 1 conference every 2 years. So, and there was more topical research, issues of migration, issues of religious radicalism, issues of security, but also issues of economic cooperation, issues of governance, issues of local government, decentralization and localization. So what happened since is, as I said, a proliferation of centers of research. Today, the Institute is not alone anymore. And the research is more geared towards answering more immediate demands. So we are more dealing with think tanks, policy research, than we are dealing with really long, academic research. And even the Institute is trying to walk into that. So among the think tanks that are very active today in Morocco, and some of whom are really very well endowed and much better endowed than the Institute of African Studies, the Royal Institute of Strategic Studies, which deal with geopolitics, the Moroccan Center for Strategic Studies, which deals with defense and security issues, the OCP, the Office Chérifien de Phosphate Policy Center, which is a think tank dealing with geopolitics and economy, International Institute of African Studies in Casablanca, geared towards the demand of the business community of Casablanca, and the Ministry of Waqfs and Islamic Affairs, as I said, which really has a very big section dedicated to religious politics in Africa. So in addition to that, as I said, many African studies program in various universities, Moroccan universities, including a chair in comparative African studies at the International University of Rabat, which is a French university in Rabat, newly created, and an African studies program at the École de Gouvernance et d'Économie, Sciences Po in Rabat. So IIS today has to really compete with numerous actors in the field, some of whom are really more or better endowed than or benefit of the support and backing of the Royal Palace. So in conclusion, I would say that the Institute of African Studies at the University of Mohammed VI of Rabat might not have made a great contribution to the area of multidisciplinary African studies. We've done a lot of history of African studies, I think, more than really multidisciplinary African studies. Our works are testimony to that. But it has contributed greatly not only to the demystification of the Saharan separation wall, but to the consolidation of the place of the Sahara in the heart of African studies. It has prepared, we consider that it has prepared Morocco's return to Africa and its pivot to Africa. It has brought new dynamism to the Africans' aspirations for continental unity and complementarity. And finally, by focusing on the investigation of common Moroccan-African heritage since the 1980s, we could consider that it has contributed to the introduction of the cultural approach to the field of international relations. And I thank you.
Good morning. Is it turned on? I'm delighted to be here and to participate on this panel today, and I wanted to thank Usman and everyone here for making this happen. I'm especially happy to be presenting with my colleagues from research institutions in Algeria, Morocco, and virtually with Ebrima in Senegal, whose presentations have underscored really the role of African research on West African and Maghrebi intellectual interconnectivities. Today I've been invited to briefly outline the role of American Overseas Research Centers, which I will refer to as ORCs in the rest of this presentation. What ORCs have played in North Africa have played in the promotion of Sahara-Sahel studies. And I do this as the director of the Centre d'études maghrébines en Algérie, a center I've directed as a political scientist for the last 12 years. At the outset, I really need to stress a simple point. And that point is that the role of American research centers in North Africa in promoting Sahara-Sahel studies, Saharan studies, or trans-Saharan studies is greatly overshadowed by the excellent work of our friends and colleagues at research institutions in Algeria, Mauritania, Mali, Morocco, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tunisia. And especially sort of the work done in Morocco and then at Libya, at the Markaz Jihad, which have been two real big poles of sort of looking at trans-Saharan studies. So why has sort of American research or research centers had such a small impact on trans-Saharan studies? Well, there are a number of reasons. For starters, we're relatively new. The American Institute for Maghreb Studies only opened its first center in Tunisia in 1985, followed by Morocco in 1989 and Algeria in 2006, whereas our counterpart, the West African Research Association, only opened its first center in Dakar in 1994. And while American scholars have been since conducting research on different aspects of Saharan studies from the centers since their inception, their number has been few and far between, and in part this reflects the difficulties of conducting trans-Saharan studies. For example, the time invested in learning multiple languages, the imperatives of finishing the PhD in time, especially if you're in some of the harder social sciences, the costs of multi-country research, etc. Also, there's the relative youth of the field of trans-Saharan studies in the United States, and perhaps, too, the very utility of American research centers, which are located quite far from the Sahara. So in the Maghreb, they're located on the shores of the southern Mediterranean. And in Dakar, of course, that's on the Atlantic coast. An institutionalized American effort to promote trans-Saharan studies in North Africa only really begins in earnest, and by institutionalized here I mean with an annual conference, regularly scheduled lectures, research fellowships, and dissertation workshops for graduate students. This only really begins in 2009 with the Saharan Crossroads Initiative launched by the American Institute for Maghreb Studies and the West African Research Association, which to date has organized 3 trans-region colloquia, a 4-year small grants program, and a young scholars workshop. And so while laudable, our imprint is less than a decade old and remains very modest and is at permanent risk of running out of funding. It's virtually impossible to discuss the role of American Overseas Research Centers in promoting trans-Saharan studies without first looking at how Saharan or trans-Saharan studies fit into, fall out of, or are completely ignored by the 75-year development of American area studies. American Overseas Research Centers are the direct outgrowth of that American Area Studies project, which itself has descended from racially charged French colonial policy and then racially charged American post-war hegemony. And while I would like to think that we've escaped our colonial and imperial roots, I think that the best we can say is that at least some of us now are reflective about what that means. And specifically, I'm talking about sort of some of the work, more recent work on sort of area studies in America by Zach Lockman or Bob Vitalis, who build off of the earlier works of Sheikh Anta Diop, Mahmoud Mamdani, and Usman Khan. And this, while many American scholars have long been aware that the Sahara serves as much as a living space linking North and West Africa rather than a barrier dividing the continent, the American Area Studies Project long used that space to cut two disturbingly discrete Africas, the Sub-Saharan Africa, with sort of black African South, and the Maghreb, or the white Arab, or sometimes white Arab and Berber North, which was subsequently attached to the Middle East by American Area Studies. And for this reason, my paper focuses on the historical development of area studies in the United States, placing particular focus on the role of institutions, funding agencies, and individual scholars in first dividing and then somehow stitching back up the continent. In American research, this dismemberment really occurs almost by mistake with the development of the African Studies Association and the Middle East Studies Association in the 1950s and 60s, which sort of are overlapped on sort of these earlier colonial heritage and ways that we see things. And we might see the stitching back together of area studies project with the creation of subfields and the professionalization with the founding of the American Institute for Maghreb Studies and the West African Research Association in the 1980s. Both organizations founded overseas research centers on the continent during the 20 years that followed, first in Tunisia, followed by Morocco, Senegal, and finally in Iran, Algeria. And as these centers provided home bases for many American researchers in North and West Africa, we begin to see greater cross-fertilization across both disciplines and space, calling for the development of institutionalized activities and programs to promote the Sahara as a lived African space linking the North to the West and vice versa. So the paper is divided into 3 sections, though today I'll only quickly summarize parts 1 and 2, while mainly focusing on part 3, which is actually the role of American research centers in North Africa in promoting trans-Saharan studies. Now, in the larger paper, I spend a lot of time mapping out the linkages between individuals, professional trajectories, philanthropic organizations and foundations and institutions in the formation of American area studies and then later in trans-Saharan studies. And sort of also I look at the linkages, the overall linkages, but they're a little bit too dense to trace out in a 20-minute presentation. And sort of in the paper I do so with primary and secondary source documents and interviews with major actors in the project. So the imbrication of people, institutions, and money is a fascinating story and raises the question of whether area studies were created by scholars or rather by powers above, outside, or on the periphery of the academe. But again, that can't be discussed here. So in the first part of my paper, I trace the slow development of African studies and Middle East studies in the United States, culminating in the foundation of the African Studies Association in 1957 and the Middle East Studies Association a decade later in 1966. And this part of the paper grants special attention to the question of North Africa as a professional home for American North-Africanists. And though in 2018, most American North Africanists would clearly identify with Mesa as one of their professional homes, that feeling was really underdetermined in the 1950s and 1960s, where people working on North Africa might have been happy equally with the African Studies Association as with the Middle East Studies Association. So during the African Studies Association's first 10 years, it was the only home to North Africanists, and with the founding of MESA in 1966, North Africanists now had a second home, leading to cross-area discussions to situate where American North Africanists should hang their hat. And that ultimately American North Africanists swung toward MESA is likely linked to MESA's early efforts to integrate these scholars into MESA's executive board and the editorial board of MESA's scholarly journal, the International Journal of Middle East Studies. In part 2, I traced the development of the subfields of Maghreb studies and West African studies close to 2 decades later, in the 1980s. Both subfields are directly traced to the expansion of the number of scholars and specialization of the research abetted by the development of professional area studies associations and the proliferation of area studies centers at American universities. The field culminated with the creation of 2 professional organizations, the American Institute for Maghreb Studies and the West Africa Research Association, organizations that would positively frame their respective fields through the benefits they offered their members. Selective material benefits included the annual conferences, biannual newsletters, quarterly scientific journals, mentoring programs, dissertation workshops, travel grants, and research fellowships for graduate students, in addition to the vital types of in-the-field assistance provided by the overseas research centers. Such advantages increased interest in North and West African studies, which in turn created a space for the development of further specialized sub-regional area studies. So I'm going to move into part 3. So with professional area studies associations established as subfield in the Middle East and African studies, and with 3 research centers on the continent, by the early 1990s, the missing link to reuniting North Africa with the rest of the continent remained the Sahara-Sahel, sort of a zone including Algeria, Burkina Faso, Chad, Egypt, Libya, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Sudan, and Tunisia. Just as the specialization of MESA and ASA engendered the formation of North African and West African studies, the multiplication and specialization of American scholars in those fields would give birth to a still very nascent field of Saharan or Trans-Saharan studies, which anthropologist Anne Geyer refers to as collective area studies, and which really focus on the economic, political, social, religious, and cultural linkages between West and North Africa, especially among scholars working on the centrality of the Bled Shingeti, making up parts of contemporary Mauritania, and perhaps to a lesser degree, some of the scholarly towns in northern Mali and Niger. And then also sort of the north-south link that scholars, economic, and political elites of these regions have made over the centuries, right? At the November 1992 African Studies Association meeting, historians Anne McDougall and the late John Hunwick organized a panel, The Missing Link, the Saharan African Studies, and the panel really discussed the compartmentalization, the unfortunate compartmentalization of the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and really the need to focus on the Trans-Sahara to tie them back together. And so doing so, in 1993, they founded the Saharan Studies Association, or SSA, which is an affiliate of the African Studies Association. SSA sponsors panels at annual African Studies Association meetings and issued a biannual newsletter for members, which has since migrated online as a Google Group network. McDougall and Hunwick, by creating SSA, really played a major yet not well-known role in pushing Trans-Saharan studies to what it is today. Similarly, in 2002, anthropologist Jeremy Keenan established a Saharan Studies program at the University of East Anglia and organized 2 major conferences on the Sahel before the program was dissolved a decade later. In the United States, in October 2004, current WARA president, anthropologist Wendy Wilson-Fall, and former Ames board member, historian Ghislaine Leiden, organized a 1-day workshop on the Trans-Sahara called the Saharan Crossroads Initiative. The workshop focused on the Trans-Sahara, seeking to promote the study of Africa in its regional entirety and therefore contributing to a paradigmatic shift, calling for a reconsideration of the area studies approach and arguing that understanding development of contiguous regions depends on grasping their interconnectedness as well as their specific characteristics at any point in time. Though planned as a 3-year program with the second follow-up conference and a curriculum development and teaching training seminar, the next organized activity would not be until 2009. During the recesses of MESA's 2006 annual meeting, North African art historian my friend and current WARA treasurer, Cynthia Becker, approached me to discuss the idea of a joint Ames WARA-Saharan Crossroads initiative to continue earlier initiatives on the Trans-Sahel. And having earned an undergraduate degree in African Studies at the University of Kansas under Leonardo Villolone, Fiona McLaughlin, and Usman Khan, and having worked closely with my PhD advisors at the University of Texas at Austin, North Africanist Clement Henry, and West African scholar Catherine Boone, a former WARA president, I strongly supported the initiative and put that idea to Ames' vote at the 2007 board meeting. Ultimately, the American Institute for Maghreb Studies unanimously voted in favor, and over the next 2 years, Ames and WARA worked tirelessly to draw up a more formalized and enduring Saharan Crossroads initiative to support trans-Saharan studies. After 2 years of planning in 2009 with financial support from outside donors, Ames and WARA launched a new Saharan Crossroads initiative, which included conferences, lecture series, and a small grants programs for scholars working on the Trans-Sahara. The first scholarly event, Saharan Crossroads Views from the North, was organized at Talim in Tangier. Organized by Cynthia Becker and WARA U.S. Director, linguist Jennifer Yanko, the 3-day conference brought together scholars working on the Sahara, Sahel, and Trans-Sahara. Ghislaine Leiden, Nigerian political scientist Abdurrahman Idrissa, who completed his dissertation under Leonardo Villolone at the University of Florida, and sociologist and then WARA vice president and later president Scott Youngstead organized the second conference, Saharan Crossroads Views from the South, organized in Niamey in 2011. Many of the papers of that conference were subsequently published in an edited volume in 2014. The final conference planned in this series, Saharan Crossroads Views from the Desert's Edge, was organized in Oran. Now, sort of Oran, of course, is not on the desert's edge, but we'd originally planned to organize it in Ghardaia in Algeria, but because of the series of sort of loud plan making and social upheaval, we had to move it to the north. The final conference was composed of a scientific committee, including UCLA anthropologist and former Ames president, vice president Omar Boum, Ghislaine Leiden, and Algerian geographers Sidi Mohamed Mohamdi and Sidi Mohamed Trash. The event differed from past conferences in that it partnered with local research institutions, including the University of Ghardaia and Algeria's premier research center, le Centre National de Recherche en Anthropologie Sociale et Culturelle. CRASC published an edited volume of select papers 2 years later. In addition to integrating American North and West African research institutions, the 3 conferences brought together scholars from the United States, Algeria, Cameroon, Ghana, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tunisia for solid discussion on the Sahara and Trans-Saharan studies. Ames and WARA, too, secured funding for Trans-Saharan studies from the Carnegie Corporation of New York. In addition to funding the 2014 conference, the grant covered costs of a 4-year small grants program, the Saharan Crossroads Fellowship to finance American field research on the Trans-Sahara, as well as North Africans to conduct research in the Sahel, and West Africans to conduct research in North Africa. During the 4-year funding stream, the fellowship financed the research of 16 American, Maghrebi, and West African scholars conducting research on the Trans-Sahara. The 2016 cycle was conducted by a 2-day workshop at Talim in Tangier, presided by West Africa specialist Leonardo Villolone and historian of the Algerian Sahara, Benjamin Brouwer. In addition to providing field assistance to scholars working on Saharan issues, in parallel to the Ames WARA Saharan Crossroads Initiative, CEMA, this is the institute that I direct, began its own efforts to promote trans-Saharan studies in Algeria. And in 2010, we purchased a 300-volume private collection on the Sahara that would be the core of a growing collection of scientific works on the Trans-Sahara. In 2011, we too initiated a Saharan Lectures series in collaboration with the CRASC, presenting the work of core Trans-Saharan scholars, including Ghislaine Leiden, Judith Sheila, Slim Khiat, Augustin Jomier, Nadir Marouf, Tamara Turner, Abdurrahman Moussaoui, Barbara Cooper, Lamine Swag, Wendy Wilson-Fall, Dida Badi, Usman Khan, and Yassine Dadi, among some of them. To date, CEMA and CRASC have organized 36 lectures and multiple methodology workshops as part of the series, many of which have been financed by local grants. So sort of in concluding, the process of promoting the American process of promoting trans-Saharan studies has not been without starts and fits of the last 50 years, and in many ways revolves around the question of the place of North Africa, one of several regions on the continent, or a region more closely linked with the Middle East. And as this sort of presentation or the paper shows, that despite the rupture within African studies sparked the birth of the African Studies Association and Middle East Studies Association in the late 1950s and early 1960s, North and West Africanists, and certainly North and West Africans, have always been drawn together, both in the research and commitment to promoting understudied regions of the continent. But very few American specialists working on the Sahara, very few, were really viewed as exotic outliers and likely thought of themselves, too, as without a home. The key driver in all of this has been the force and conviction of a group of American, Maghrebi, and West African scholars to support, if not personally engage, in cross-discipline, cross and trans-regional analysis. For the past 30 years, a growing number of international scholars have argued that the significance of the cultural and economic and political continuity spanning the Saharan desert merit a new perspective, sort of trans-Saharan studies. But we might ask whether Saharan studies, or the study of lands, people, and cultures of the Sahara, is the same thing as trans-Saharan studies. The former remains divided between North Africa and West Africa, whereas the latter necessarily moves between the two and sort of links the two. With the movement of ideas, trade, and people across the Sahara, Saharan studies, within Sahara, that's always in the background, but generally Saharan studies focuses on sort of static places such as oases, Saharan cities, Saharan ethnic groups, or sometimes the linkages between people and places of the Sahara and national capitals, thus in effect intrastate trans-Saharan studies. Whereas trans-Saharan studies, dominated by anthropologists, linguists, geographers, and historians, especially historians working on economic and legal institutions, the flow of ideas, and empire, sort of are different. And you really see a sort of a difference between sort of Saharan and what is trans-Saharan studies in the breakdown of the sort of the types of grants that we've offered and the types of presentations that have been held at our conferences at our different research centers. Sort of in concluding, I just want to conclude saying that sort of despite the fact that for centuries, sort of North and West African scholars have been keenly aware of the interconnectivities between them, sort of in the United States, it still remains a sort of relatively youthful field. There's still a limited number of scholars working on this, and the environment to promote scholarship on the Trans-Sahara is still quite difficult. Having said that, sort of increasingly professional associations, institutional support, and financial backing, and the drive of individual scholars should likely continue the promotion of sort of a nascent trans-Saharan studies in the United States. Thanks.
I want to spend a little bit of time. My paper is in three parts. A little bit of a conceptual background and history, and something about CODESRIA itself, and a set of new trends and challenges. I will begin with a quote from Ali Mazrui. Mazrui is well known for what he said about Africans having a triple heritage, right? That's very widely cited. But Mazrui also talks about Afrabia. It's a concept he used in an article he published in a journal called Ifahamu, a journal of African studies, in 1992. And the title is Afrabia, Africa and the Arabs in the New World Order. And I think both in this article and in what I'm going to say about CODESRIA, we'll see that it's not only a question of the relations covering a geographical area across the Sahara, linking the north and the south, but it's also about the kinds of issues that are raised in the discussion and in the research and in the intellectual connections. Mazrui, in this article I mentioned, talks about Africa being actually, not so divided as it may appear, and Africa and the Arab world are both, from 3 points of view, actually connected very, very closely. The first point of view is the geological point of view, and he argues that Africa and Arabia were one landmass before the Great Rupture took place and separated them in part. And so the second point he is making is that continental Pan-Africanists tend to see the Sahara as a sea of communications rather than a chasm of separation. And therefore, the Sahara doesn't constitute a natural barrier, and there is no other natural barrier between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, or what is referred to as Sub-Saharan Africa. The third reason for saying that there is much closer relationship between the two is historical, actually. That historically, the peoples of the regions have been moving in both directions, built strong networks of religious nature, trade nature, intellectual networks all across. And Mansour, therefore, argues that these long and intensive relationships and linkages have created what he calls Afrabia and communities of Afrabians. Now, he defines Afrabians in the following terms. They are what he calls the cultural Afrabians, who are those whose culture combines African traditions with the Arab or Muslim heritage. African Muslims and native speakers of Swahili and Hausa languages are cultural Afrabians in this sense. There are also the genealogical Afrabians, who are those who are descended by blood from both Africa and the Arab world, like the Mansour family, his own family in particular. Then there are the third category of those he calls the ideological Afrabians, who are those who believe in the unity of Africa and the Arab world without having either a shared ancestry or a shared religion. And he quotes Kwame Nkrumah as a good example of that, whose children obviously are genealogical Afrabians because they have an Egyptian mother. And Abdullah Bouchra, who was the first full-time executive secretary of CODESRIA after the council was founded in 1973 by the late Samir Amin, who passed away just last month. Bouchra sums Mansour's definition by saying that Afrabia, in fact, is therefore a product of geography, while Afrabians are the product of intensive relationships which have taken place between the Arabs and Africans in what he calls corridors of interaction. Now, Mansour further argues that there are a lot of Africans, the majority of Arabs, are on the African continent, right? And there are also, in addition to those who call Arabs who are on the African continent, there are the Somalis and the Kushites and a number of other populations that have strong Arab and cultural influences who are also on the African continent. Now, what happened, therefore, over the years given that unity of multidimensional unity, Abdullah Bouchra, in a lecture he gave in Libya in 2002, argued that there are actually corridors that existed, 3 corridors that have been used, as lines of communication, channels of communication between, the one part of Africa and the other part, in which Afrabians have been communicating. That's what he calls the Eastern Africa Corridor, including the Horn of Africa. And then there's the Nile Corridor, which includes Ethiopia and Uganda. And there is the third one, which he calls North Africa-Sahel West African Corridor, which is much closer to the subject of this particular conference, looking at West Africa and the Maghreb. And the relations between the Arabs and the Africans which took place in these corridors can be looked at from the perspective of historical processes or contemporary relationships and processes. Now, historically, there have been political and economic relationships that link the two. There are contemporary interstate relationships. There are contemporary institutional relations through institutions such as the African Development Bank, the Arab Bank for African Development, private banks, enterprises, and so on, universities, think tanks, the AU, the African Arab League, labor unions, telecoms unions, educational organizations, and so on. And then there are people-to-people relationships, which historically and contemporarily have taken place through migration, settlement, intermarriages, informal trade, religious networks, and so on. I think what is important to note here is that the colonial experience sort of disrupted these relationships in a very big way and introduced new dimensions. And we should remind ourselves that throughout the African continent, wherever also there has been a tension, and the issues of religion, Islam in particular, and Muslims, come into the scene, it sort of it has been associated with certain tensions and in some instances even open conflict, and that sort of impacts on the relationships between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I think what I see even more important is talking about Afrabia is what actually it means in terms of the identities of people, and because the examples that Mansour cites and Abdullah Bouchra, and we have seen at CODESRIA, is that there is a blending of cultures and identities, particularly through Islam, the Arabic culture, and in many African countries, one finds people, including countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, and elsewhere, where a number of people have Arabic influences in their cultures or in the languages they speak or the religions they practice. And that was why at CODESRIA we began talking about an Arabophone initiative instead of Afro-Arab relationships. I remember having these discussions very often with Fatima, and there was a sort of a reluctance to talk about Afro-Arab relations because that was a little bit superficial in the sense that it didn't capture the complexity of the relationships that exist between these populations we are referring to. And there has been, in the sense also, through the work of CODESRIA and all these networks of an intellectual nature that I've been referring to, a kind of common space of meaning that has been constructed. Now, what happened with colonialism and the building of independent states, because the process didn't stop with colonialism, is with the construction of independent states and the attempt to build nations and strengthen national identities, there has been a sort of redirection of loyalties and a kind of a fracture introduced between, in a sense, the different countries and between those who are to the north of the Sahara and those who are to the south of the Sahara. And with the creation of sub-regional bodies like ECOWAS or Union of Maghreb, you also have a reason why a certain number of countries will tend to, coalesce among themselves and look at the others as, at best, exchange partners. Now, what I want to move on to now is what has been called the new Pan-Africanist intellectual connections, and focus more specifically on what CODESRIA has tried to do. CODESRIA is a Pan-African Social Science Council that was established in 1973 and based in Dakar. And from the beginning, it chose to cover the continent as a whole. And in the way it is organized and the way it is governed, you have all the parts of the continent covered. In a sense, at the beginning, it sort of followed the AU model, or the OAU, which was what was in place then, and had representatives of scholars from East Africa, Central Africa, North Africa, West and Southern, in the executive committee of the council. But the more important thing is that there was an attempt to create CODESRIA and turn it into a platform that would be a platform for intellectuals of Africa to engage in, and here I'm quoting Samir Amin, independent and audacious reflections on the problems of the contemporary world. So the point was not about Africa only, but it was about Africans making sense of the realities around them within the continent, but also making sense of the world around, and doing that in an independent way. The context was a context of dependence, great dependence following the colonial experience, and fragmentation, again following in part the colonial experience. And obviously the starting point was, if you want to have an independent and an audacious take on issues, or look at the issues, you have to deal with what Moody may call the colonial library that has been, I'm sure, discussed extensively in this conference. And then, deal with epistemological issues that are associated with knowledge production. Now, Samir Amin, for those who don't know, and I don't think anybody would ignore that fact, he was an Egyptian who, in fact, lived the last 5 decades of his life mainly in Senegal, where he established, CODESRIA established another network called ENDA, working on environmental and development issues, and the Third World Forum. And this Egyptian, therefore, convened this meeting at which CODESRIA was formed in 1973. And in the team, we had a number of people from all over the African continent, and some came from the diaspora. And after he left, he was succeeded by, he gave away after 3 years the leadership of the Secretariat to Abdullah Bouchra, who is a Kenyan Arab also. And I think what this tells us is that here was an attempt to make sure that there was a space open, and there was a forum at which African intellectuals of all persuasions, particularly those who are interested in the independence of the continent, could come together and reflect across all the boundaries of a linguistic nature, disciplinary nature that existed. And that, therefore, is what CODESRIA tried to do, and reaching out to across the Sahara Desert to North Africa was a normal thing to do. as part of an attempt to have a comprehensive understanding of the issues. I think the understanding that most African intellectuals therefore had of the continent was that it was a single space, in a sense, even if it was sort of fragmented, but it was one space, and it's a physical space. It's a social space in the sense that Henri Lefebvre uses the term, a space of production, a space of reproduction, and a space of representations. And in attempting to be a continental council, that is the space that CODESRIA tried to occupy. And the founders obviously had a deep understanding of the intellectual history of the continent, and that history is a history also of very close relationships and exchanges across the Sahara Desert. We have major centers on both sides, in some in Morocco, some in Tunisia. We have the Timbuktu is one of the major centers on southern part of the Sahara. In Senegal, there are a number of other intellectual centers as well. Now, I think to illustrate the attempt to have this coverage across the Sahara Desert and involving everybody is the way in which programs were structured and activities were organized. And the most important event, of course, that is held every 3 years is the General Assembly of CODESRIA that brings together a cross-section of the community. And the 13th General Assembly was held in Rabat, hosted by the Institute of African Studies that Fatima discussed extensively in our presentation. It was the conference at which Fatima was elected as the first North African to be the president of CODESRIA. And I think with the election of, first of all, with the rotation, it was a way of bringing home this community and to make it feel at home in every part of the continent. The General Assembly had been held in East Africa, in Southern Africa, in West Africa many times before then. And then this time around it was in North Africa. I want to speak a little bit more specifically about the kinds of interventions that CODESRIA has been making that sort of show this determination and certainly a certain attempt to make sure that we cross all the boundaries and we function as a community that is not confined to the sub-Saharan part of the continent. And the main interventions are, of course, research, nurturing a new generation of researchers through a series of training programs, publishing, initiating public debates, and policy debates. The aim, obviously, one of the main aims is to bridge knowledge divides across these disciplines, across different intellectual traditions. And one of the most important divides has been that the one that Usman Khan discusses in several of his books now. The first one is that one titled Non-European Intellectuals. And that is the divide between all those of us who have been to these institutions of higher learning that are modeled on the universities of the West, and all the other intellectuals who've been either to other parts of the world or who didn't go to the Western universities anyway. And the divide has been there for a long time, and the attempt to engage with the intellectual community was at one point felt to be an absolute necessity if we are serious about again being Pan-African and not confining our community to the confines of what the Europhone intellectual are discussing. And then I think that publication was followed by a major event, a conference, and followed by a book on the meanings of Timbuktu, which sort of took the debate further in terms of engaging the content of the Timbuktu manuscripts written in different languages, but using the Arabic script for many of them, and that's Ajami. And then there were other initiatives that followed. The much more usual ways of operating in terms of generating research is through what are called these working groups. There are country-level groups called national working groups, and networks that cover several countries called multinational working groups or comparative research networks. And the way it is organized, the way these groups are organized, country-level groups are initiated by people. So you've had some initiated by Moroccan scholars, by Tunisian scholars, by Algerian scholars. I could name quite a number of them as I move. And then there are also the multinational working groups, which are more deliberately, aimed at connecting the conversations and making sure that people work on issues that are of interest and of importance to the continent across the linguistic and the geographical divides. I just want to cite three. One was on labor movements and the processes of transformation on the continent. And it had as its coordinators an Algerian, Ali Elkans, who is now in Nantes, probably has retired, and a Nigerian as another coordinator, that's Jimmy Adesina, also specialist of labor issues and social movements. The second one is one on urban processes, and we had a Moroccan, Adelgani Abu Hani, as one of the coordinators, and Abdul Malik Simon as the other coordinator. And the third one is, the third example is a network on a multinational working group on social movements with a Tunisian, Mahmoud Ben Ramdan, I understand is a minister at one point, was a minister in the government of Tunisia much later, and Mahmoud Mamdani was the other coordinator together with Wamba Jawamba. Now, these are people from different parts of the continent, but they are also working in different languages. So you have the possibility of making sure that people engage with the literatures and intellectual traditions in the different languages, here particularly English and French, in a much more important way. And the second mode of operation are the national working groups, which are, have decided a number of them, tens and tens of them set up across the continent, probably hundreds now. Here, one of the criteria was the extent to which a national working group would inform the rest of the continent on the issues that are of importance in their context. But in a sense, it was a way of getting scholars together. In some cases, in fact, they had no experience of working together as on their own initiative in the countries that are cited, that were established, and then coming together to say, look, we want to contribute to a debate. It's a multidisciplinary initiative, researching an issue and then contributing that to the debate on the continent. And here are a number of examples, and Zakaria Abou Salem, who is with you there, led one such group in Mauritania, on this and Mauritanian state, and there are a number of others in Algeria and elsewhere too. A third mode of intervention has been just the scheduling of activities in different parts of the continent, including in North Africa. Some of them are regular activities being held in the same places. Cairo is one place where symposia, gender symposia are held, or used to be held every year. There is a good relationship with the African and Arab Research Center. Translations into Arabic have been done mostly there. The Arabic edition of CODESRIA Bulletin is published from there. And so on. And then it's good that on this panel we have somebody from CRASC, Professor Kedidir. And CRASC is one of the main partners of CODESRIA in Algeria. They've been hosting the methodology workshop for North Africa regularly, where young scholars from across the region come together to discuss methodological issues. And they're also the co-editors and co-managers of the Africa Review of Books, which is a Pan-African journal, bilingual, English, French, and together with a center in Ethiopia called the Forum for Social Studies. Again, this is one way of linking institutions and getting them to work together and manage a project together. I think the most ambitious attempt that we launched together with Fatima was that of an Arabophone institute, as we call it, which was intended to be an advanced institute that would bring together scholars from the different parts of the continent on themes of importance to both parts of the continent. Unfortunately, we had one session, and so for some whole host of reasons, there hasn't been a second session. Publishing is the third or fourth mode of intervention. I think what makes a difference usually in the connections between the two is also when staffing issues are handled properly. Because it's a Pan-African institution, there have been attempts by CODESRIA to get people from North Africa in the secretariat in Dakar, and that changes the dynamics quite a lot when you have people who are able to engage with the communities who know the networks in the other parts of the continent and can help in mobilizing. We've had Hakim Ben Hamouda, who's been in the secretariat, before him Najib Mousselmi, also a Tunisian, and now we have Sidi Hida Bouchara from Morocco, who is in the secretariat. I want to talk about, this is the last part of my presentation, I'm told the time is running up, of what are the trends and what are some of the challenges. I think what I heard in Fatima's presentation actually resonates quite well with what has been happening to CODESRIA. There are a lot more partners now involved in these exchanges with North Africa, with institutions reaching out to those on the other side of the continent on their own, with, I think the official reference, the first one has been cited as an example. The Center for Strategic Studies has been cited as an example. These are centers that have relationships with CODESRIA, and they followed, of course, what the Institute of African Studies has been doing with CODESRIA before them. So you have, that is, I think, an important trend. And again, you see more them posing as think tanks, picking up issues that are contemporary, related to the environment, or discussing environmental issues, discussing migrations, the migration crisis, discussing security challenges in Sahel, particularly with ACME, Boko Haram, and the crisis in Mali. Now, Mohamed Salih, at the planning meeting that we had in Cairo in 2010, and Fatima was there too, the meeting to plan the Arabophone initiative and make it a major research and publishing and training program that will involve work on these issues that are related to Arabophony on all parts of the continent. Mohamed Salih made this argument that one way of promoting these Pan-African connections across the Sahara is actually to get scholars and institutions on both sides to be picking up issues of a contemporary nature, addressing the current challenges that are on the agenda of both the scholars and the policymakers of both sides. And I think that's been something that we've been trying to do a little bit, but more of it ought to be done now. And the good reason why it has to be done is that already you've got a lot of engagement at the level of the business community. Companies are establishing here and there. You've got the migration issue which I referred to. We also had the Arab Spring, what has been called the Arab Spring, happening at exactly the same time when a lot of other movements were also, rising up in Sub-Saharan Africa. Yanamar in Senegal, Bali Citoyen later in Burkina Faso, which are some of the most vibrant youth movements on the continent today, all addressing the same kinds of issues related to job insecurity, to problems of poor social services, and other issues of importance to both of them. And I think these are issues that research has to pick up in a more important way. And obviously, I think the research that can inform very well on these issues is the one that is done in a collaborative manner, linking people across the continent. Now, I want to probably end my presentation here and say that, look, I think with all the efforts that have been made, fact of the matter is, in CODESRIA circles, North Africa is still somewhat underrepresented in terms of the number of activities that are carried out. And that is a challenge that people have been thinking about, finding ways of overcoming, and have not still figured out the best way of doing it. And I'm seeing it where I'm now working with Trust Africa, it's based in Dakar also, and exactly the same issues are coming up. It's also a Pan-African institution, and we realize that only 2% of the activities are held in North Africa. So here too, we are saying, well, maybe you could borrow a leaf from CODESRIA and hire people from North Africa and schedule more activities in North Africa. The second thing I want to say in conclusion is that there is an interest in these issues for the nature of the debates that one can have, when we come together to discuss. And I'll cite just one example. Talking about these movements for democracy arising in North Africa and on the rest of the continent. In 2013, CODESRIA co-organized with the University of Tunis and the Tunisian Arab Sociology Association also a conference on these movements for democracy in North Africa and in a comparative perspective with the rest of the continent. We had as partners these institutions that actually contributed even to the financing of these activities. And they could have gone ahead and organized this conference on their own, but there was an interest in a Pan-African understanding of the issues and a shared understanding of these issues across the continent. And I think that's something that we should take into account as we move on. I think the third point I want to make in conclusion is that there are also a lot of tripartite relationships that are built. And I think the last presentation by Professor Parks is a good illustration of that kind of initiative. I think in the study of migrations or pilgrimages or economic exchanges or security challenges, it would be very good to have more of these tripartite relationships linking, for example, Harvard Divinity School or the Center for African Studies at Harvard with CODESRIA and some institutions in North Africa, coming up with joint research projects and policy dialogue conferences and so on. The only thing one can have to do as a cautionary note is that often these initiatives are taken by the institutions of the North that come with not only the ideas as what's to be done, they also have the resources, and therefore the capacity and the potential for picking up Pan-African issues in those debates are usually quite limited. So I think it's something to pay attention to as we do that. I think one of the answers to that is to have maybe more of these initiatives taken also by scholars of the South coming from Sub-Saharan Africa or from North Africa, and then inviting the others to join in the collaborative undertaking together. I think I'll stop here and say once again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate. I'm sure I've missed a lot and have probably been repeating things that you already have been discussing, but it was an opportunity to share a few ideas and an experience which I think has been very valuable and from which we can learn a lot more than what I've just mentioned. Thank you very much.
I usually don't feel comfortable in a conference that doesn't give enough room to the participants to raise questions. So I'm going to use my prerogative as chair to at least allow us to do that in the next 10, 15 minutes, if that is okay by Usman. Okay. So I'm sure there are comments or questions. Let us be very brief. Let's start with Ebrima so that we can allow him go also, but let's kind of ask him some questions. I'm going to raise the first question, my brother. I quite agree with everything you have said, but the question I have is that why is it that African Union is not supporting CODESRIA? I understand that, in several of the comments we've had today, African studies in Morocco, they lack resources, they lack money. So a Pan-African initiative like that, and I quite agree with you that it's a very central institute for all of us. Why is African Union not supporting it, at least financially? Why is it not a part of the agenda, particularly maybe on their cultural development or education development in Addis Ababa? That would be my question. Any other question for him so that we can just give him the chance to respond to all our, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Zakaria Ahmed Salim. Hello, good to see you. Good to see you, Ebrima. This is Zakaria Ahmed Salim.
Good to hear you.
So thank you for that overview. I think this has been a conference on Islam in Africa, so it's a topical conference, but it was very helpful to have this institutional conversation between institutions that really did a great job. And now I think the West, in general, the Western institution where we are based now, and we are grateful for that, but they really are catching up with what CODESRIA and the Institute, the Rabat Institute of African Studies have been doing for many years. Of course, I'm especially biased because I've been helped by CODESRIA to run a national group, my first edited volume. I really felt home coming back from France to go back to Africa and find a home, an intellectual home. And maybe without that, I would have not been continuing to do my scholarship. So I think we need to remind people of the role of CODESRIA about that. But beyond that, I think also it's helpful to examine, as you guys did, the work that has been done in terms of intellectual history, contemporary intellectual history of Africa. So one of the things that have always puzzled me about CODESRIA is it has not been pushing for study of religion. So this is a discrepancy that I've been struggling with. I like everything about CODESRIA, and I am a very vocal member of this organization, and I will always support it. But how is it, how I know there is some intellectual, ideological, maybe explanation, but why did CODESRIA neglect for so long the religious effervescence in Africa in its programs?
All right, last question for him. If you can permit me to answer the last question. I think CODESRIA did. I once chaired a CODESRIA summer program in Senegal.
Yeah,
It was on religion and politics, and there were 13 young scholars from different parts of the continent who came there. Yeah, okay, but I'll give it to you. It's not my question. Yeah. All right. You want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Professor. Thank you for the questions, and Zakaria. I think I want to begin with maybe the last question, and then I go to the first one. Part of the answer has been given. There has been an attempt to not only do research, but to prepare scholars to do more research on religious issues, and as you said, I think they are extremely important issues that we cannot ignore. And the institute that Professor Olupona directed for 3 weeks some time ago was intended to lead to the setting up of networks, religious networks, and some of it happened. People continue to work on their own on the issues, but it's true that there was no major program following that, bringing together the same group, which would have been ideal. But there have been, other attempts also, and even before then, I think talking about intellectual history, the work that was done with Usman, when he came up with this book on non-Rofon intellectuals, was actually I think the first major take, on those issues and say, look, no, we cannot, just continue to function as if the only literature that is available is literature in English and French that we know, and then leave aside all the debates and all this volume of work that exists, and begin engaging with it. And it was followed also again by more research programs. And it was good that the issue was taken up, certainly by others in their own work, but probably a lot more also could have been done. And there have been some, other publications that came out that are related to that, as I said, the manuscripts of Timbuktu, and so on. But you're right. I think there should be much more effort. And I mean, religion it's also been discussed. They've been talking about gender. There's been a lot of work looking at with people like Fatima leading it. What are the implications of particular discourses in religion on gender and gender relations, and issues like that also have been picked up. On the first question related to the African Union, Professor, I think you put your finger on a very fundamental issue here. For a long time, I think it was an underestimation of the value of research, right, at a very general level. Obviously, not also forgetting that the African Union, for all its activities, is also funded primarily by external sources. But they have enough resources to devote to research, and there was, for the time, some kind of negligence of the value of research, and they were not putting money into that. But if you just look at the trends and what's going on today, we've been talking about North Africa and Morocco coming back to the African Union. I mean, it should have been the subject of important, research initiatives, and some people are picking it up on their own. But it's something that could have been of interest to the African Union to say, look, hey, CODESRIA, why can't you, we are interested in getting to understand this thing better. We can support you to do it. Morocco joining ECOWAS is a subject of debate among the intellectuals now, and I think it's something that probably will become more important as we go along in the discussions among intellectuals on both sides of the Sahara. But that's also something that ECOWAS and the African Union could have also maybe initiated and supported. Beyond that, there are a lot of other activities that are not only confined to that. We've approached the African Union when I was the executive of CODESRIA and proposed that, look, they're signing partnerships with China, with Turkey, with the European Union, with Brazil, with all these continents and countries, and yet one wonders what is the knowledge that is backing and the research that is backing those negotiations when they go into negotiating them. Because we don't have the infrastructure, we don't do much research on other regions of the world, and so there was an attempt to say, look, you need to support research more. The good thing, though, and I'll stop there, the good thing is that there is, within the AU, I think, increasing awareness of the importance of research and of the importance of linking up with research institutions, universities, and CODESRIA in particular. And before I left, we had a memorandum of understanding with the Political Affairs Department of the African Union, who saw the journal we are publishing with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa on transformations, and they thought that they also could benefit from something like that. And more important was that they felt that the work that CODESRIA does could complement the work that they do. It's a small department of the African Union, involved in firefighting all across the continent, monitoring elections, monitoring human rights abuses all over the continent, and they are not successfully doing that. So they're saying a strategic partnership with institutions like CODESRIA would help in not only generating knowledge, but also maybe finding answers to some of the big problems of the AU, and that is implementation, for example, of all the decisions that they're taking, the obstacles to that, and how to, make their work much more efficient. But I think this is what I would want to give as answers to these two questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ebrima. May I invite the other members to come back to the table so that you can listen to these questions and answer them. Thank you. Thank you, my brother.
Hey, morning. I'm a student at HKS. A small question. I was talking to one of the panelists over there, and my background is more like I was working for an NGO and based in Senegal, in Dakar. So I was traveling all over the region. And, we don't have much funding. But let's say if you have like, I don't know, like $1 million budget. My question is, what can we do because I work a lot with madrasas, and I'm looking for practical solution. I'm not a researcher in any way, and I love to read. Most of the research I read. But my job is to implement, to develop projects and to implement them in the Sahel. So I'm always, how can I say that? Most of the time, I don't know what to do. They give us the budget and they ask us to come with specific project, how we can help on the ground. So if I can give you any advice, any ideas, any solution, I'd be very, very happy. I know it's not a researcher's question, but that's I don't do much, but that's what I do for work.
Yeah, I guess so. So have you written grants, or your questions sort of how to write grants, or?
No. We do write grants.
Okay,
and
yeah.
We get funding from USA, from different organizations.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, people doing those grants, they live here.
Yeah.
Either in DC or California. And they gave us, every year they come with 5 or 6 initiatives, and we just lost. So there's a big disconnect between people in the headquarters and we people living in Niamey or Timbuktu. And my thing is, very quickly, I traveled with my Gabonese passport for security, because I work in security for NGO. And they took me in the Sahel with 3 other guys. They shot 1 guy. But when I was talking to them, they had no idea of Islam. The people who took us. So I can see that what they were learning in those madrasas, it was not really what I knew of Islam. So I talked to my boss and I said, we need to work with madrasas. We need to do something like that. But we just don't work. I don't know what to do. So that's why I'm looking for ideas. And I'm sorry, but that's not a research question. That's why.
Well, I think sort of once we convene, I think that you've got sort of a whole pool of people here to talk to that can be sort of more useful than certainly me. And I can't speak for Mansour or for Fatima, but I think that's.
Okay. Let me thank the speakers. This has been a wonderful experience for us. It's a pity we didn't give you more than 20 minutes. You obviously have a lot to say, but I'm sure the conversation will continue with Professor. And I want to again express gratitude for coming to Harvard Divinity School and being part of this initiative. Thank you very much.